Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hope you guys are doing well. This is I think the fourth time I try and record this particular episode, but for whatever reason, I've been encountering some technical issues, and I don't think that is an accident. I don't think that is a coincidence. Maybe because, for whatever reason, this particular topic is so important or so pivotal that if it does end up getting out and produced, and I can only keep my fingers crossed because, like I said, four times it ain't funny no more. Uh, if it does get out, I hope it does. Uh, I hope it makes a difference to you, to someone close to you. So the topic is about ego and how most of us are conditioned to only associate ego with negativity. And of course, there's a very negative side to ego. But there's also a purpose behind that. And I'll try and speak a little bit about both. So the first thing I'd like to say is the reason we get into trouble through our ego is when we don't live our genuine life, when we leave the driving seat of our destiny empty. Ego has a place to advance and take leadership. So in other words, if our higher self, our unique self, our true self doesn't lead, then the ego takes control. It is in the driver's seat. Now here's the problem with the ego being in the driver's seat. It is a terrible driver. It is not qualified to lead. It has its attributes, which I'll speak about later on, I hope. But one thing the ego is not qualified for is leadership. Largely because leadership requires us to go into the unknown, to go into the dark, to embrace change, to transform, and to sometimes completely self-annihilate into a completely different version from ourselves. It requires a tremendous amount of faith and there's a tremendous amount of fear and change involved in leadership, true leadership. I'm not speaking about the appearance of leadership. Now, the reason the ego is so bad at this is that it's just so not designed to change anything. In fact, the ego really wants every day to be the same as the last. The ego doesn't like change. The ego just wants to make sure that we are safe, we are secure, and anything that's going to jeopardize that in any shape or form should be avoided. The ego does not like to be vulnerable. The ego does not like to lose. The ego does not like to relinquish control. The problem with that is if you want to live a life of growth where you're constantly changing to something better, which is arguably your inheritance, then the ego, unless you have an awareness, the ego will not like that at all. And it will fight with every single dirty trick in the book to make sure that you don't change. And this is where a lot of pain and suffering occurs. Most people who don't live their life and have their ego controlling them tend to really not only hurt themselves but hurt everybody around them, because they cannot have everybody else change, because if they change, they're not in control. If they're not in control, they're not winning, and if they're not winning, then this is unacceptable. Real growth very often occurs when we lose, when we investigate why we lost and we develop from that platform. But so long as the ego is in control, then none of that's going to happen. And the whole point here is, if you're not living your life, a genuine life that is reflective of your higher self, then you've left the driver's seat empty. And if you've left the driver's seat empty, you have allowed ego to control your life. Now, this is the point where I'm going to argue for the purpose of ego. The purpose of ego is to help us survive. It's a valuable part of our team. We need the ego. But like I said, it's not qualified to lead. The ego should be in the back seat. The ego should be leashed and employed. When we employ our ego, we can use it for what it's really good for. And that is pushing forward, being stubborn when we need to be stubborn for a higher reason, so long as our higher self is in control. The ego needs to be put to work. The minute the boss isn't there and you, the higher self, for whatever reason, you're too scared to lead into the darkness, you're just not leading your life. You've convinced yourself that you are not going to lead. You are going to relinquish control. That is when the ego is blown out of proportion, and it takes the driver's seat, and it just damages everyone, because it just doesn't know how to let go. It doesn't know how to feel its way through change, because change is the opposite of its nature. So the ego is really good to help us fight for survival. The ego is really good for giving us that self-pride that we use not to hurt people, but to help them recognize that they are something. So the ego is good for certain things, but it's not good for others. So it's really important that we recognize the ego for what it is. It is a part of us, a valuable part of our team that we need to employ. It is not qualified. I repeat, it is not qualified to lead. That's your job. You need to lead yourself towards change. And if you're not changing, then I'm guaranteeing you, based on my experience with my own self and my own struggles with my own ego, if we're not changing, then the ego is in control. And if the ego is in control, we're doing a lot of damage. And most people, sadly, live in a world where they just feed their ego. They feed it and feed it and feed it, and it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger until you have a very, very damaging person at the helm of your life that is causing a tremendous amount of pain. And it is vitally important to be aware of that, and to recognize that the ego needs to be confronted by true leadership and asked to be sat at the back seat. So you need to take control back from the ego and to employ it to your benefit. Otherwise, it is a tremendous amount of pain that you may be going through without even knowing. And the most damage occurs when we don't know what we're doing. So that's it from me for today. I hope this gets through. I hope you get something out of it. Like I said, this particular episode has been very interesting for me because I've had a lot of issues in it getting out. Again, maybe the ego in me is trying to prevent it for a good reason. Because once the ego is like I said, the ego will fight. It'll fight dirty to stay in control. But that doesn't mean you should get rid of it. It's a part of you. Don't recognize it to be bad. Just manage it in a way that makes it work for you. It is without a doubt what you push against. I don't think I will get to a stage, maybe higher people have, But I don't think I'll get to a higher stage where I will get rid of my ego. I need the ego on my team. But like I said, it needs to have its position very, very clearly defined. And only then can it be used for good. So yeah, that's it for me today. It's been a funny one for me. Um, Make sure you keep your egos on a leash. Employ them. Do not let them into the driver's seat. Do not let your ego rule your life. Whether you're female, whether you're male, young, or old. Find out. I invite you to ask yourself some questions of who is in control. When you get really angry, you're really upset, or when you say things that are controlling, that demand no vulnerability, where you're just obsessed with not changing something, ask yourself who is in control. And if you recognize that it's not your higher self, that tends to be very compassionate, that tends to be very caring, then it's your ego. You've left space for that ego to come, and it's this struggle between you and the ego that you need to push up against. And I think the more experience we have, the stronger we become at managing the ego. It's just like a muscle or a martial arts technique. I need my ego to wrestle against. My strength comes through my ego, not from my ego, but through dealing with my ego. My strength doesn't come from the absence of my ego, but with my ego there, wrestling and fighting for its own benefits. Yeah, let's all keep our egos in check. Let's all lead our lives to somewhere where we deserve to go. Because when we do live our life, our genuine life, where ego is not in control, then we live a life that contributes to ourselves first and to the communities that we are attached with second. So that's it from me. All the best, and see you soon, inshallah.